Ash blanketed the ground, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt wood. Amid the desolation, a tiny bear cub clung to Daniel with all the strength it had left, desperate and trembling. 12 years later, he'd understand just how much. The dry season had turned Yellowstone National Park into a ticking time bomb. The sun, like a ruthless tyrant, beat down on the brittle earth, transforming golden meadows into a sea of straw. Stalwart acacia trees, symbols of resilience, stood tall and skeletal like bony sentinels against the blazing sky. A suffocating stillness gripped the air, broken only by the occasional raspy cry of a vulture circling overhead. In this parched landscape, the brown bears, led by the biggest and most formidable of them, fought to survive. The streams had dried up. The fish were gone. Where salmon once swam during this season, only cracked earth remained, etched deep with the scars of relentless heat. Their usual hunting grounds yielded nothing. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Driven by desperation, the bears launched a bold pursuit of a lone, elusive fawn. But the hunt quickly spiraled into chaos. The surprisingly nimble deer led them on a wild chase through thorny underbrush and rocky outcrops. In the frenzy, the mother bear, laser-focused on the chase, lost track of her tiny cub, just a few months old. Panic rippled through the forest. She abandoned the hunt, her growls echoing across the barren land, a desperate cry for her lost baby. The cub, left behind in the cracked and burning wilderness, stumbled through scorched grass, letting out faint whimpers for its mother. No answer came, only the silence of a thirsty forest. It started with a spark, maybe a lightning strike, maybe a careless ember left behind from someone's campfire, but it was enough. The dry grass caught like tinder, and the flames, fanned by relentless winds, tore through Yellowstone with terrifying speed. The sky turned a menacing shade of orange, and thick, acrid smoke choked the air, blotting out the sun. In the chaos, the bear cub cried out in fear, stumbling blindly through a sea of burning grass. It tried to run, but its young instincts couldn't make sense of the smoke and swirling ash. A flaming branch crashed down nearby, searing heat brushing its hind leg. The cub collapsed, overcome by pain and panic. It crawled forward, dragging its lightly burned leg, trembling beneath a rain of falling embers. No sign of its mother, no idea where to go. Just the sound of its own ragged breathing and the stifling smell of smoke clinging to its soot-darkened fur. At that very moment, Daniel, 27 years old, was a young biologist recently recruited to join Yellowstone's brown bear research and conservation program. A lifelong nature enthusiast, he'd always dreamed of one day stepping into the wild heart of Yellowstone to work alongside its mystical mountain creatures. But he never imagined his first time here would be during the worst disaster in the park's history. A few days later, Daniel and a small survey team were assigned to inspect an area scorched by fire just 3 days prior. The ground was still radiating heat, and ash floated in the air like ghostly snow. Tracks, muddy and frantic, revealed the desperate escape attempts of deer, wolves, even bears. Many hadn't made it. As the team ventured deeper into the most devastated zone, Daniel heard something strange. It wasn't the crash of falling trees or the crumble of cinders. It was a sound low and raw, a weak, rasping whimper, repeating rhythmically like a cry for help. He stopped. His instincts, sharpened by years of observing animal behavior, guided him toward the sound. Beneath a charred, leaning tree, Daniel spotted it, a tiny creature, fur singed, wide-eyed with fear, trembling all over. A bear cub. No more than 4 or 5 months old, its once soft brown coat was now matted with soot. One of its hind legs was swollen, likely burned or injured in a fall during its escape. The cub stared at Daniel, equal parts terrified and defensive, growling faintly as it backed into a hollow, blackened stump. Daniel didn't move closer. He crouched low, keeping his distance, never taking his eyes off the cub. This was when his training kicked in. Keep your distance. Intervening in nature is strictly forbidden, especially with wild bears, he reminded himself. According to conservation protocol, no human was allowed to interfere with a wild animal without express authorization from a wildlife council. Intervening too early could disrupt natural cycles or worse, create animals dependent on humans, unable to survive in the wild. And yet, Daniel scanned the area. No signs of the mother. The forest was nothing but scorched earth and smoke. The cub was too weak to find food or water. Left alone, it would be dead within hours. His heart pounded. Images rushed through his mind, a fragile life, huddled in ashes, fighting to stay alive. He remembered why he chose to become a biologist. Not just to watch, but to understand, and when possible, to help. He radioed the team, asking them to return to base. When they pressed for a reason, he simply said, "I need a moment." Alone. Then Daniel crouched lower, unzipped his backpack, and slowly placed a bottle of water near the edge of the stump. The cub stared at it for a long moment. Then it crept forward, wary and slow. It drank, its head wobbling, front legs nearly buckling. Daniel didn't move. After a few minutes, the cub pulled back and collapsed, eyes half closed. That moment would change Daniel's life. Carefully, he removed his outer jacket, wrapping it gently around the cub and lifting it. Not with force, but with calm and care. The cub didn't resist. It was too exhausted. As he placed the tiny survivor into the emergency crate in the back of the Jeep, Daniel gave it a name. Ash. Not because it was weak, not because it was broken, but because it had survived the fire. On the drive to the rescue center, Daniel said nothing. He knew he had just broken the rules. But in his heart, he also knew this was the right thing to do. That single act would spark a chain of events no one could have predicted. But in that quiet moment, with a sleeping bear in his arms, Daniel thought only one thing. If nature ever gave me a chance to save a life, this is it. Bringing the bear cub to the rescue center was not a celebrated act. The very next morning, Daniel was called into an emergency meeting with the project's management team. They were far from pleased. Intervening in nature, especially in the aftermath of a disaster, was strictly forbidden. Daniel's actions had violated that rule and, worse, risked setting a dangerous precedent. Daniel didn't make excuses. He acknowledged his mistake but stood firm in his conviction. I know the rules, but that cub had no mother, no water, no shelter. If I'd left it there, it would have died, without question. He offered to take full responsibility for its care and to closely monitor its recovery. If the cub failed to meet rewilding standards, he said, he would voluntarily withdraw from the program. After a tense discussion, the board, though not fully convinced, granted Daniel a 2-week trial period under strict supervision, and so began his journey of caring for a creature whose survival had never been guaranteed. The early days at the center were grim. Ash, still weak and traumatized, refused to eat. Any time someone entered the enclosure, the cub would curl into a corner, growl low, and hide its head. The injury to its leg, though not severe, made movement painful. Even water was left untouched if a human was nearby. Daniel didn't force anything. He kept his distance, sitting several meters away, quietly placing a shallow dish of condensed milk near the exit. At first, Ash wouldn't even look at it. But hours later, when all was still, the cub crept out and licked at it, cautiously. Daniel repeated this routine for days. No words, no reaching out, just being there, so the cub could learn, here, there is no threat. 1 week in, Ash began eating with Daniel in sight. 3 days after that, it tolerated him placing the water closer. And on day 14, something remarkable happened. Daniel gently offered a spoonful of honey near the cub's nose. Ash didn't bite. It simply gave a soft lick. Caring for Ash quickly became a full-time commitment. Daniel spent hours each day observing its behavior, tracking its recovery. He bathed the cub in warm water to soothe the burned skin, applied antiseptic, and guided it through small exercises to rebuild strength. When the leg began to heal, he took Ash to a shallow pond in the sanctuary grounds to help it relearn how to swim. Ash no longer growled at the sound of Daniel's boots. It no longer hid. It approached, slowly at first, then steadily, drawn not by taming, but by trust. 7 months later, Ash was fully recovered. Its new coat gleamed, its eyes sparkled, and its stride was strong, playful even. The center's monitoring reports confirmed. Ash was ready. It had the skills and instincts needed to survive in the wild. The day of goodbye had always been inevitable. Daniel didn't say much that morning. He simply stood in silence, watching as the staff opened the forest gate, forming a clear path for Ash to return to the wild. The young bear, now nearly waist-high, paused and looked back one last time. It wasn't the gaze of a domesticated animal. It wasn't a plea. It was a quiet moment of recognition, like etching the image of the one who had stood beside it when its entire world was nothing but ash and fear. Then it turned and slowly walked away. Daniel didn't call after it. He didn't follow because he knew it was ready. "12 years later, Yellowstone had healed itself. The once charred land was green again. Fish had returned to the streams. The forest was reborn, and Daniel was no longer the rookie. He was now one of North America's leading wildlife ecologists. This time, he returned to Yellowstone not to rescue, but to oversee. An important survey on the distribution and behavior of wild bear populations, a decade after the post-fire rewilding began. Modern technology had come a long way, but the field still needed people like Daniel, people who could read the landscape and the animals as if by instinct. The expedition lasted several days, mostly on foot, through canyons and remote forests where satellite signals faded and vehicles couldn't follow. On the 4th night, an unexpected downpour rolled in. The forecast hadn't predicted a low-pressure system, but early-season storms were notoriously unpredictable. The team had to make camp early, on the edge of a ravine, just safe enough from landslides and close enough to reach the bear tracking zone at dawn. As usual, Daniel took it upon himself to scout the terrain before resting. He was meticulous. Scratches on bark, cracked stones, the tiniest trace could be a data point. While inspecting a steep rock face near the ravine's edge, he noticed fissures, narrow cracks, common after the first rains of the season. He didn't get the chance to note them. A strange sound rose up, low, deep, and drawn out. The forest, breathing heavy, then the snap of shifting rocks, the crunch of earth giving way, and the shriek of wind forced through narrow stone. Survival instinct kicked in. Daniel took a step back. But it was too late. The ground collapsed beneath him. There was no time to react, no handhold to grab. A mass of earth broke loose, dragging rocks, branches, and Daniel down in a sudden landslide, throwing him into a rocky crevice nearly 10 meters deep. His body slammed against the rock wall twice before hitting bottom, not high enough to knock him out, but hard enough to break his right leg and bruise him from head to toe. His breath came in short gasps. Every inhale stabbed his chest. He tried to roll over, but a rock pinned him down, heavy enough to hold him, not to crush, but enough to keep him trapped. Looking up, all he could see were slanted treetops and a sky heavy with rain. He reached for his radio. No signal. No one knew he had strayed from the group. No voices, no reply. Just rain tapping against the stone. He called out a few times, loud, then louder, but the sound vanished into open air. The surrounding rock swallowed noise like a grave, and the wind wasn't strong enough to carry his voice far. Daniel realized he was completely cut off. Lying there in the mud, his leg broken, body soaked, breath shaky, he ran the numbers. With a fractured leg, no food or water, and dropping temperatures overnight, he had maybe 18 to 24 hours before his body would begin to shut down. If the cold crept in by dawn, hypothermia would come next. He lay still. Mud clung to his skin, the smell of wet earth and rotting moss filling his lungs. The last of the light drained from the sky, and then came something worse than the fall. Night. No lights, no human sounds. Only the steady rhythm of rain falling on the canopy and the faint, eerie hiss of wind through the stone. Daniel lay there, leg broken, freezing, voiceless, and no strength left to call out again. Each passing minute, his body grew number. His consciousness slipped in and out, drifting somewhere between pain and darkness. Then, through the haze, he heard something. Faint, subtle, the soft crunch of movement over wet stone. At first, Daniel thought he was hallucinating, but the sound came again. Closer now, heavy, measured. Not human, not small. A low, steady rhythm, like something massive moving with purpose through the shadows. A dark shape appeared above him, framed by the narrow opening overhead. Daniel held his breath, his body tensed in fear. A brown bear, huge, its gait slow, its muscles rippling under rain-drenched fur. A wild animal in every sense. Under these conditions, this was the worst thing that could happen. Daniel tried to crawl backward, but loose debris pinned him in place. He had no weapon, no way to defend himself. He knew bears could smell blood, sweat, weakness. In those terrifying seconds, his mind flashed through the worst possibilities: a silent attack, a body never found, an end that no one would ever know. But then, something happened. Something no field manual, no scientific paper had ever prepared him for. The bear's eyes, they weren't filled with rage, or hunger, or threat. They held something else, something steady and unspoken. Recognition. The bear stopped. It didn't growl, didn't charge. Instead, it lowered its head, sniffed the air, as if confirming something invisible. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to paw at the rocks near Daniel's trapped leg. Not in panic, not like a bear caught in a snare, but with precision, with care, as though it knew what it was doing. Daniel couldn't trust what he was seeing. The pain was still sharp, the cold still real, but something deeper stirred in him. A flicker, an instinct, a memory. Then the fallen headlamp's beam caught the bear's face, a faint scar on its left ear. Dark brown eyes, bright, not wild, but focused. That distinct tilt in its gait, favoring the right side like an old injury. He froze. It couldn't be. But it was. Ash. The cub he had once saved, now fully grown, powerful, and according to recent tracking data, likely the dominant bear in northern Yellowstone. A bear released back into this very forest 12 years ago. Daniel couldn't speak. His throat tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper. A kind of awe, a kind of knowing. A wild animal, one that should have forgotten him entirely, was now here, silently digging through stone to help him survive. About 10 minutes passed, just enough for Daniel to shift his leg free from the crevice. He still couldn't stand, but he could move, roll slightly, breathe easier. Ash didn't leave right away. He stood a few meters off, watching. Not aggressive, not afraid, just present. Then, as the distant echoes of the search team's calls began to drift through the trees, Ash turned and walked slowly back into the forest, just as he had walked into Daniel's life all those years ago. When the rescue team finally reached the ravine, they couldn't believe what they saw. A narrow rock crevice, fresh landslide marks, and a man, leaning against the stone wall, barely breathing, but alive. There was more than exhaustion in Daniel's eyes. There was something else, gratitude and awe. They saw no bear, but Daniel knew. It had come, at the exact moment when he had no other hope. News of Daniel's survival spread quickly across the research station, but it was the story that followed which shook the world. His account of a fully grown brown bear approaching him, calm, intentional, not to attack, not to flee, but to help, to dig gently, with care, as if it remembered him. A follow-up investigation by rangers confirmed it. The bear matched the profile of Ash, the cub rescued and released 12 years earlier. Camera trap footage showed Ash was still living in that region, now a dominant bear of the northern Yellowstone population. Daniel's story of breaking a rule to save a small life and being saved in return by that very life became a global symbol. Conservation groups, scientific journals, major news outlets, and international ecology conferences all spoke of it as something rare, something real, a message. The bond between humans and nature isn't just poetic. It's a living connection. One that can survive, one that can endure, if we meet it with patience and respect. Years later, when asked to recount the moment at a major conservation summit, Daniel gave only a quiet reply. "I don't know if it remembered me, but I do know this. When you choose to stand on the side of life, nature doesn't forget." The true message of this story wasn't found in any report or scientific journal. It lived in the hearts of the millions who heard it. Sometimes, the kindness we offer to nature doesn't disappear. It simply waits for the right moment to come back and save us. And if this story touched you, share it. Because maybe, just maybe, one small act of kindness today could become someone else's miracle tomorrow.